The mystery of Ray Kroc, the truth revealed. The world knows Ray Kroc as the man who turned McDonald's into the biggest fast food chain on the planet. But few realize that before he became a business legend, he lived a life marked by failures, rejections, and the painful feeling of being invisible to the world. For decades, Ray was just another salesman, ignored, underestimated, forgotten. From an early age, Ray learned what it meant to face closed doors. The son of Czech immigrants, he grew up in a humble home, surrounded by the pressure to succeed but without knowing how. While he watched others thrive, he collected failures, one after another, like scars etched on his soul. Success always seemed just out of reach, but the real pain wasn't poverty, it was humiliation. With every lost job, every failed attempt, he bore the contemptuous stares of people who thought he was incapable. He sold paper cups, played piano in bars, tried his luck as a radio announcer, and finally clung to the only thing he had left, selling milkshake machines, a job no one respected, and that felt like a life sentence to mediocrity. While the world moved forward, Ray saw himself getting older without ever leaving his mark. At 50, when most people think about retiring, he faced the harsh reality that his life might end exactly as it began, unimportant, without a legacy, without a story, a chronic failure, and it was killing him inside. But there was a restlessness within him, a voice that never shut up, that screamed he wasn't born to be invisible, that somehow his time would still come. Even without knowing how, even with no path in sight, Ray Kroc refused to accept that this was the end. Not yet. But fate is rarely generous to those who just sit and wait. And for Ray, the price to change his story would be steep, far steeper than he could have imagined. The game of life had only shown him its cruel side up to that point. But what was about to happen would change everything. At that time, Ray Kroc was driving down endless roads, city to city, with his last hope in the trunk, milkshake machines. Every sale was a battle. Every no he heard was an invisible stab. And little by little, the weight of frustration seemed heavier than he could bear. The bills didn't add up, time was running out, and failure felt final. Then, in the middle of yet another tedious sales routine, something caught his attention, an unusual order. A restaurant in San Bernardino requested not one, not two, but 8 milkshake machines at once. The number sounded absurd. Who, in the 1950s, could possibly sell that many milkshakes at the same time? Curiosity beat exhaustion. Ray decided to visit that place himself, and when he arrived, he was shocked. In front of him was something he'd never seen before. The restaurant owned by brothers Richard and Maurice McDonald wasn't like the others. It was efficient, precise, almost mechanical. Long lines, happy customers, and a system that made fast food look like magic. Watching closely, Ray saw something few would have noticed. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a money-printing machine, hidden behind burgers, fries, and milkshakes. And more than that, it was a model that could be replicated, scaled, multiplied to infinity. But there was one problem. That genius didn't belong to him. It belonged to the McDonald brothers, simple, humble men who, to raise frustration, had zero ambition to turn their little kingdom into an empire. They wanted stability, not greatness, comfort, not world domination. At that moment, a spark ignited inside Ray Kroc, a dark mix of ambition, hunger for power, and the accumulated pain of a lifetime spent being ignored. In his mind, an idea started to form, an idea that would change the world. But it also carried a price that would come with interest and no mercy. That night, Ray Kroc didn't sleep. His mind raced. The image of that perfectly functioning restaurant wouldn't leave his head. For the first time in decades, he felt something long dormant, a flash of purpose. A cruel certainty was forming inside him. This was his chance, maybe his only one, and he couldn't let it slip away. But there was a brutal obstacle in the way: the McDonald brothers. Honest, meticulous men, but with no appetite for risk or wild growth. They loved their small local business, and they were blind to the monstrous potential it held. In their view, growing too much meant problems, headaches, chaos, and they wanted nothing to do with that. Ray saw with disturbing clarity that convincing those men to expand would be useless. They'd never see what he saw. So, a new idea began to form: bolder, riskier, darker. If they didn't want to build an empire, maybe he could do it alone. But how? He had no money, no partners, no investors. All he had was his obsession, his hunger to prove he wasn't born a loser, and that, as absurd as it sounded, would be enough. Because when someone is willing to lose everything, there are no limits to what they can conquer or destroy. Fueled by this insane hunger, Ray sat down with the brothers and began to craft the first contract. Behind the mask of a friendly, optimistic salesman, he hid his true intent: to take control of the brand. Not aggressively, not yet, but subtly, stealthily, infiltrating himself into the operation bit by bit. He knew the game wouldn't be fair, but life never had been, and Ray Kroc, after a lifetime of being overlooked, was ready to do anything to rewrite his story, even if it meant destroying whoever stood in his way. The contract was signed, and with it, a new battle began. Officially, Ray Kroc became responsible for McDonald's expansion, but in reality, the brothers still saw him as just an operational partner. They kept control of the finances, the key decisions, and severely limited any change to their original model. They didn't fully trust him, and Ray knew it. On the outside, he kept smiling, kept the friendly tone, kept talking partnership, but inside, his mind plotted every move. With every new restaurant he opened, Kroc felt the tension rise. The brothers questioned, set rules, clipped his wings. With every roadblock, his frustration turned to rage, a cold, calculated, and extremely dangerous rage. Ray realized he could never build an empire while chained to the McDonald's demands. It was like sitting on a gold mine with his hands tied. Every cent that came in passed through the brothers first. And for a man starved for greatness, that was simply unbearable. Then he found the loophole: a detail in the contract, something the brothers hadn't noticed. But for Ray, it became the key to domination. The contract allowed Ray to create a separate company responsible for acquiring the land where restaurants would be built. This meant one thing: the real power wasn't in the food. It was in the land, the properties, the physical control of space. From that point, the game changed. Silently, Kroc started buying up land, building the buildings, and leasing them to franchisees. So, anyone who wanted to open a McDonald's didn't do business with the brothers. They did business with him. Every new contract he signed, in practice, meant another piece of the empire in Ray's hands, not the McDonald's. The trap was set. Stealthy, elegant, ruthless, and while the brothers still believed they were in control, Ray Kroc was already digging their graves in the corporate game. The McDonald's empire, slowly but irreversibly, was starting to change owners. Success spread like a virus. With every new restaurant, Ray grew stronger, and the brothers grew weaker. While they remained stuck in a small-town mindset, Ray was already thinking on a national scale, dreaming of absolute domination. His obsession grew, and so did the certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop him. But the price of ambition is never cheap, and Ray began paying in coins of loneliness, exhaustion, and personal conflict. His family life collapsed. His marriage was nothing but the shell of a union destroyed by the man he was becoming. The nights were long, and sleep, a luxury he could no longer afford. Work became his only reason to exist. There was no more room for love, leisure, or rest. There was only room for one thing: to win. Win at any cost. Win not just over the McDonald brothers, but over his entire haunted past. Win against the mediocrity he'd carried for over half a century. While the brothers clung to the rules, Ray broke every single one. He changed menus, adjusted processes, enforced standards, and pushed franchisees to the limit. He understood that, to turn it into an empire, there could be no weakness, no compromise. McDonald's had to be a machine, and machines have no feelings. The brothers tried to resist. They questioned, wrote letters, called lawyers. But it was useless. Ray was always one step ahead, hiding behind the contractual loopholes he'd designed himself. Every attempt by the McDonald's to slow him down was met with more expansion, more control, more domination. They were caught in a web they didn't even know existed. And deep down, Ray knew. He knew this wasn't just about hamburgers or money. It was a psychological war. It was about proving to the entire world that he was not a failure, that he would never be ignored again, that the name Ray Kroc would one day be bigger than anything the McDonald brothers could have ever imagined. But every war reaches a point of no return, and for Ray Kroc, that point was coming. His relationship with the McDonald brothers was hanging by a thread. What were once cordial conversations were now loaded with accusations, veiled threats, and deafening silences. They looked at each other, and they knew. Someone would fall, and it wouldn't be Ray. So he made the boldest and cruelest move of his life. He offered to buy the brothers out, an offer that, to them, felt like betrayal. Like an employee showing up at the boss's door and saying, "I'm the boss now." The proposal seemed obscene, but the brothers were cornered. They no longer had strength or real control. The trap had snapped shut. The negotiation was tense, drawn out, bitter. The brothers demanded a high sum, thinking Ray wouldn't be able to pay. But once again, they underestimated his hunger. Ray secured funding, found investors, sold promises, and closed the deal. He bought the company for $2.7 million, a fortune for the time. A fortune that wasn't just money, but the official end of an era. But there was a detail. Dark, cruel, almost inhuman. During negotiations, the brothers asked to keep their original restaurant, the first location in San Bernardino, outside the contract. Ray agreed, verbally, without putting anything on paper. When the deal was signed, he simply took that store too, registered the McDonald's name as his own property, and within days forced the brothers to remove their own name from the building. The McDonald brothers, the true creators, spent their last days bitter, forgotten, running a small restaurant called the Big M, until years later, they were crushed by their own creation. Ray opened a McDonald's across the street and watched, coldly, as they went under. That day, Ray Kroc officially became the king of a global empire. But there was no pure glory on that throne, only scars, only ghosts, only the weight of knowing that, to win, he had to destroy, mercilessly, those who once offered him a hand. With total control of McDonald's, Ray Kroc never looked back. Now free of any chains, he could turn his obsession into something even bigger and even more brutal. The model he built became an expansion machine. Every restaurant was a perfect replica of the last, an army of units ruled by strict processes, standards, and rules, where nothing, absolutely nothing, escaped control. But behind the shining facade, the golden arches, and the smiles at the counter, there was a dark reality. The pressure on franchisees was suffocating. Anyone who didn't meet every detail was simply cut out. Ray wouldn't accept mistakes, wouldn't accept slip-ups, wouldn't accept humanity. He wasn't building restaurants. He was building a perfect machine, and whoever failed would be crushed by it. The empire grew at a monstrous pace. Cities, states, countries. Every week dozens of new McDonald's popped up, and with them, more money, more control, more power. The world looked and saw a symbol of modernity, convenience, and American success. But only Ray knew what it really cost. Every store was a reminder of everything he'd had to destroy to get there. While the world applauded him, Ray sank deeper into his own darkness. Success didn't bring peace. On the contrary, the obsession only grew. It was never enough. Never. There was always a new territory to conquer, a new competitor to crush, a new impossible goal to hit. The hunger was insatiable. He began to realize he was no longer competing with other fast food chains. He was competing with himself, with his own ghosts, with that old failed salesman he saw in the mirror and who, even now, still whispered in the back of his mind, "You're not enough. You never were. You never will be." And so, while the world feasted on burgers and fries, Ray Kroc fought a silent war inside himself. A war that maybe not even all the money in the world could win. Success brought him fortune, but it also brought something Ray never imagined he'd have: invisible enemies. The media started questioning his methods. Unions rose up. Accusations of exploitation, unhealthy food, and destruction of small businesses started to appear. The man who was once ignored was now at the center of the spotlight, and not always in the way he wanted. But for Ray, all of that was just noise. He never backed down, not ever. Every criticism, every negative headline, every protest was fuel. He didn't see it as a problem. He saw it as proof that he was on the right path. Because deep down, extreme success never comes without resistance. And anyone afraid of resistance never builds an empire. Internally, though, the price kept getting heavier. His health started to take its toll. Sleepless nights, relentless stress, unforgiving pressure, it all started to eat away at his body. Alcohol became a constant companion, often the only thing that could silence the ghosts that showed up when the office lights went out. Ray also realized that no matter how much money he piled up, there was something money could never buy back: time. The time he lost with his family, with friends, with himself. The life he abandoned while turning hamburgers into a global religion. And even then, he didn't stop. Because stopping meant facing the void. And the void was more terrifying than any corporate war. It was like he needed to prove, every day, that he was still alive, that he still had control, that he was still relevant. The world saw a fast food empire, but behind the golden arches was a man in ruins. A man who traded everything, absolutely everything, for a name, for a legacy, and for an internal war that maybe would never end. Time, the invisible enemy no empire can defeat, started to show its claws. Ray Kroc, now old, carried the scars of a lifetime of battles, both external and internal. The energy that once seemed endless started to fade. His body faltered, his mind wavered, and the cruelest ghost of all started to draw near: his own mortality. But not even the nearness of death made Ray slow down. If anything, he sped up, as if trying to make a deal with fate. Every second was precious. Every new store was a statement. I'm still here. I still own all of this. It was a race against the clock, a desperate attempt to leave a legacy so massive that not even death could erase it. And in a way, he succeeded. McDonald's crossed borders, oceans, cultures, planting its golden arches in every corner of the world. He had no more competitors, only followers, replicators, imitators. The empire he built became more than a chain of restaurants. It became a symbol, a living monument to obsession, discipline, and yes, greed. But in the middle of all this reckless expansion, Ray realized something cruel. The bigger it grew, the less control he had. The company became a monster that walked on its own, with its own interests, shareholders, directors, bureaucracy. It was like he'd created a child that no longer obeyed him, and that destroyed him inside. He watched, powerless, as his empire became even colder, even further from its origins. Decisions no longer passed through him, and even with all the money, all the prestige, all the power, he began to understand a brutal truth. In the end, no one controls everything forever. And so, sitting in his office, surrounded by photos, trophies, and memories of a life marked by victories and by destruction, Ray Kroc stared into the mirror and wondered, was it worth it? But the answer, maybe even he didn't know anymore. With his health increasingly fragile, Ray began living out his biggest fear, losing control. The man who once moved mountains now fought just to stand up. His speeches no longer had the same impact. His orders were often ignored or softened by executives. The world he built was slowly starting to leave him behind. But even so, he didn't let go. He kept showing up at meetings, checking on franchises, handing out threats and promises in equal measure. It was as if he was fighting death itself, using every new store as an extension of his own existence. Every hamburger sold was a reminder that Ray Kroc was still breathing. Inside, though, the emptiness only grew. The memories of his beginnings, of failure, of closed doors, returned like ghosts that were never exorcised. He understood now that he never escaped failure. He just traded it for another kind of prison, a prison made of success, money, and loneliness. Alcohol became his most faithful companion. He drank not to celebrate, but to forget, to numb himself, to escape the terrifying silence that came when the office doors closed and the phone stopped ringing. Because deep down, there was no one waiting for him on the outside, only the emptiness. Ray also began to notice that his public image was no longer just that of a visionary. The criticisms about obesity, labor exploitation, and cultural destruction started screaming louder, and this time, not even all his money could silence the world. He looked back and saw a trail of victories, sure, but also of casualties, broken friendships, destroyed alliances, lives crushed in the name of an empire that he wasn't even sure belonged to him anymore, or if, in the end, he was just another cog in the machine he'd created. The final blow came when McDonald's own board began moving to push him out. Disguised as an honorable retirement, his removal was, in truth, a quiet exile of someone now seen as dead weight, a relic from the past. Ray, the architect of the modern empire, was slowly set aside while new executives took the throne. He watched helplessly as his creation changed into something even bigger, more automated, more out of anyone's hands. What had once been his personal obsession was now an autonomous entity, ruled by numbers, spreadsheets, and shareholders who cared little for the original vision, or for him. The emptiness that had been his shadow for years now became absolute. There were no more battles, no more goals, no more wars. All that was left was to look in the mirror and see not a winner, not an empire, but just a man. A man who conquered the world, but lost everything you can't buy. And even then, he never admitted regret, never said he would have done it differently. Because deep down, Ray Kroc knew he was a product of the corporate jungle he helped create, a world where only those willing to destroy everything and everyone in their path survive. Now, his body finally began to fail. Heart problems, collapses, hospitalizations. Every trip to the hospital felt like another board meeting where the last chapters of his life were being written by force. But even from his hospital bed, he kept asking about the numbers, the stores, the profits, because until his last breath, Ray Kroc was exactly what he always had been, an obsessed man, a man who preferred to be hated than forgotten. Ray Kroc died on January 14th, 1984 at age 81 after heart failure and multiple organ complications. He died surrounded by luxury, yes, but not by people, not by love. His funeral was discreet, almost silent. No crowds, no grand tributes. The man who fed billions left this world alone. But his legacy, no one will ever erase. McDonald's, born from his obsession, became the greatest symbol of global capitalism. A brand worth billions. Present in more than 100 countries with over 40,000 locations worldwide. A money machine, a cultural juggernaut, a force of influence, loved by some, hated by others, but ignored by no one. Ray Kroc is gone, but his shadow remains. Every meal sold, every French fry served, quietly carries the DNA of his boundless ambition. His name became synonymous not just with success, but also with controversy. A cruel reminder that in the business world, winning almost always means destroying. Today, McDonald's is more than just a fast food chain. It's an empire that makes more money from real estate than from hamburgers. The real genius, or coldness, of Ray was realizing that the true gold was in owning the land, the prime locations, not just selling food. McDonald's is actually one of the world's largest real estate companies. But behind every golden arch, there's a story few know. The story of a man who started out selling milkshake machines and ended up as the architect of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. A man who showed the world you really can turn burgers into gold. But to do it, you must be willing to pay the highest price. And this is the brutal, dark, and fascinating story of Ray Kroc, the man who refused to accept failure, and in the process became a legend or a monster, depending on who's telling the story. If you want more stories that show the raw, untold truth behind business legends, hit subscribe, like this video, and let me know in the comments what empire or entrepreneur you want exposed next. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Here, we dive deep into what the world doesn't want you to see, so you never see business the same way again. See you in the next video.